been so far away. I ran all night and day.
You almost just for a seat.
Earlier in the week when I couldn't find a place back here, I was like, I guess I'll sit up here. I'm the back seat student, but whatever. Then they could see very clearly who was rifling out a bunch of questions I didn't really like about it. That was the one on mess. They liked my story, it turned out, but they didn't like my questions.
About the profitability of
Something like that, yeah.
There's no money in it.
I thought they were.
Unless we ask other people.
What did they expect? I mean,
Fawning on coverage, I
I
guess.
didn't think it wasn't like combative or anything.
When the one guy told me that they don't make profit, but then kind of admitted that they do make profit, I was just like, yeah, I can't expect to be here right now, so fuck it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to stand up there with that.
Yeah, I will. Yep. Oh, we're doing it now?
Yep.
All right.
Excuse me. Good morning. I am Representative Emma Greenman. I represent South Minneapolis. I also represent the Minnesota VA and the Minnesota Veterans Home. So this is an issue of particular concern to me. As we have seen in the last 80 days, Donald Trump, as he's been president, has done nothing to lower the costs or improve people's lives. In fact, he's done quite the opposite. Trump and Musk has instituted a regime of chaos, of corruption, of retribution that is causing real harm in the lives of workers and our communities. Millions of Minnesota lives and livelihoods have been threatened by the stroke of a pen, and also a slew of emails sent by 20-somethings under the direction of an unelected billionaire without an official government title. All of this is in service of Trump and Musk's and their billionaire agenda to kneecap government, and it appears to sell it off for parts to their oligarch friends. But for the 18,031 federal workers in Minnesota, of which 8,700 of them work for the Minnesota VA, the last 80 days must have felt like a betrayal. Trump and Musk and their Doge bros are jerking these men and women around who have dedicated their lives to serving our communities and the United States of America. And it's not only the federal workers who have been impacted. Thousands, probably tens or hundreds of thousands more of Minnesota workers who work for state and local government, who have government contracts that have been canceled, that have been frozen legally and illegally, the MDH workers, hundreds of them have already been laid off because of the impacts, and this won't end there. The chaos of mass layoffs, the uncertainty of tariffs, the unpredictability of the economic retribution we're seeing is causing an impact on our economy and our workforce. In the years before Trump took office, before Doge and before the daily proclamation of trade wars and economic retribution, Minnesota's economy was strong, our unemployment at record lows, and our work in the legislature had been focused on unrigging the economy so it works for Minnesota workers, not just corporations and the wealthy few. But now we have to focus on protecting those Minnesota workers from the chaos of Trump and Musk and what they have wrought. As state officials, we don't control what happens in Washington, D.C., but it is our job and our obligation to use the power we have here in Minnesota to protect Minnesotans and our workers the best we can from the chaos that's being wrought. Last weekend, we saw 43,000 people right here at the Capitol and tens of thousands more around the state asking and demanding that elected officials stand up and protect them and their families and their livelihoods. And that's what these bills do. These bills protect federal workers, they protect Minnesota workers, they protect our workforce, and they ensure that we're doing what we can to to protect and shield, and where we can stop the harm from happening. And with that, I will introduce our great friend from the Senate, Senator Grant Huschtell.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. As you all know, I represent the largest and most rural district in the state. And so I have a lot of federal employees who look out for our natural environment. We have an EPA lab on the North Shore just outside of Duluth that employs 170 employees. I have a 148th Fighter Wing with civilian employees right in my district in Hermantown. These are people who work, live, play, and are raising their families in our communities. So when the email came from Elon Musk, an unelected billionaire oligarch out of the White House, telling folks a similar subject line to what he sent to his Twitter ex-employees, a fork in the road. Imagine getting an email that says a fork in the road. And it says, you can decide to retire early or face the consequences. These are the messages and the comments that I'm getting from constituents. Decide now your own fate. Leave now or face the consequences. That is not how government works. That's not how merit works. That's not what these federal employees work their entire lives to do. And unfortunately, this is exactly what this White House is trying to do to people's livelihoods and to our communities. I've done town halls all across my district. Again, a very rural area. Hundreds of people are showing up to back up the Forest Service, to back up the Park Service, to back up the EPA workers, to back up the civilians at the 148th. These are people, they're their friends, they're family members. And so Representative Johnson, who's going to get up here next, we have a bill that would address this coercion that happened from the federal government trying to get people to leave. And we are trying to find out a way at the state level. How can we look out for them? How can we have their back at the state level if the feds are going to leave them out to dry? So with that, I'll pass it to Representative Johnson to talk a little bit more.
Thank you all for being here. This is an important conversation, and I'm grateful for my colleagues who are standing here side by side with the workers in this fight. I want to focus a little bit on the amendment that we offered to House File 3078, the 13-week extension for government workers once their unemployment benefits run out. The reality is that with so many of these folks out of work, for some, it'll be difficult to find new jobs or new employment before those benefits run out. We want to make sure that these dedicated public servants stay here in Minnesota and are not forced to leave our communities in search of work elsewhere. This surge of unemployed workers will also put a strain on Minnesota's dislocated worker program, and this extension will allow some breathing room and allow that system to work as it's intended. To be clear though, this extension isn't just about policy. It is about people who have dedicated their lives to serving throughout our communities. Recently, I spoke with a medical professional at the VA who provides critical telehealth services to veterans all over the country, remotely, as intended. But they were suddenly told that they had to report to an office, which they had never had before, hours from their home to sit in a cubicle to do this work. The Trump-Musk administration knows that this is not good for workers. They know that it is not good for veterans, but their goal is clear: make the job unbearable so that people leave. As Senator Aaron May Quaid recently said, it's the equivalent of removing batteries from the machine, making it unworkable for everybody. So I'll just close with this. We know that there's a lot of workers that have reached out to us and want to speak out, but they're afraid of the retaliation that could follow. They're worried that they'll be seen as disloyal to this president. This is not normal. This is not how we should be treating those that serve our country, and we need to do better. With that, I'll pass it off to Jake Romans, President of the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 3669.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks for having me, too. I'm Jake Romans. I'm the president of AFG Local 3669 out of the Minneapolis VA. I represent over 2,300 employees. So there are 18,000 federal employees in the state. That equates to roughly 0.003% of the state's population. That's a very small number of people, but it'll have a huge relief on those who are laid off. I would rather have my taxpayer dollars help my fellow Minnesotans than wasting it on something that has no substantial impact or benefit to us. The Deferred Resignation Program, also known as the Fork in the Road, has been reopened again until April 30th. That means more Minnesotans will be without a job. People took these offers to either get away from the abuse of federal employees or because they made the determination that their financial or familiar situation warranted such a consequential decision. From my understanding, the federal government is currently honoring the DRP contract for the first round of employees. However, there is a legitimate question as to whether it will continue to be honored until September 30th. There have been at least 12 employees that we know of who were terminated during the first round of firings. They have since been reinstated into their positions. However, the recent Supreme Court decision to allow some probationary employees to be terminated and the pending court decision on the Maryland lawsuit, they may lose their jobs again. One of the first round of probationary employees included a 100% disabled veteran. That employee's performance was outstanding, and there did not seem to be a legitimate reason to terminate her. Another employee is a researcher who helps conduct studies that improve veterans' health outcomes. Losing this person again would delay important studies that benefit veterans. HF 3078 impacts a small amount of people, but has a huge impact on their livelihoods. The government exists to serve the people. This bill would do that. This should not be a partisan issue, because I guarantee that people of all political alignments will know somebody that these terminations impact. Providing some financial relief will go a long way in healing the divide between us and better the lives of our friends, family, coworkers, and each other. And with that, I'll pass it off to Representative Matt Norris. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Representative Matt Norris. I'm proud to represent Blaine and Lexington in the Minnesota House of Representatives. I'm here today to talk a little bit about my House File 3164. And the spark that really inspired this bill came a couple of weeks ago. This was when there was that daily drumbeat of droves of federal employees being laid off, essentially haphazardly, day after day after day. And I saw a story on the CBS News about some veterans who had been laid off by the federal government. And the story highlighted that there are an estimated 6,000 veterans who were essentially fired by Donald Trump and Elon Musk at the federal level. And I just, I was so frustrated because I thought, what a loss to our country. These veterans who left, service and then chose to serve our country again by working for the federal government. These are some of our finest public servants in the country, and they were just haphazardly tossed to the side. But then I started to realize that our country's loss could be Minnesota's gain. And that's why I'm bringing forward House File 3164 that offers $10,000 relocation bonuses to veterans who were fired by the federal government who choose to move to Minnesota to take a new job. When you talk to businesses in our state like I do, one of the biggest challenges they face is finding enough workers. And there's no one I would rather hire than a veteran. In fact, my legislative assistant is a Marine veteran. Businesses talk about wanting to hire for soft skills. These veterans, they've got all the soft skills you could look for, teamwork, reliability, perseverance. And so I think there'd be nothing better than adding these veterans that President Trump and Elon Musk recklessly cast aside to Minnesota's workforce. The bill also includes money for DEED to promote this program to veterans across the country who have been laid off so that they know about it and they know about this opportunity to come to Minnesota. Offering these bonuses would help offset the costs of moving to Minnesota and also send a message that while Trump and Musk may not care about our veterans, Minnesota does. So come to Minnesota and be a part of a workforce here in Minnesota for decades to come. And besides the employment issues we've been seeing at the federal level, we also know that these tariffs are wreaking havoc on the country. And so to talk more about that is a local business owner from St. Paul, Dan Marshall.
Thank you. Yeah, hi there. My wife Millie Adelsheim and I have been selling toys in St. Paul for 25 years. We own Mischief Toy Store on Grand Avenue. thanks to my daughter Ellie coming along today. My oldest daughter Abby joined us as co-owner a few years ago. She got us through COVID, honestly, with her innovations that she came up with to deal with the situation. But you know, we've been through the dot-com bubble burst. We've been through the Great Recession. We've been through COVID, and I honestly can say that the anxiety caused by these spiking, ridiculous tariffs that Trump has put in place over the last month has just spiked. Millie and I are just crazy with anxiety right now, and I think that's the same for any small business owner right now, because truthfully, a toy that we're selling right now for $10, which makes a great birthday present, is going to be $25 unless Trump decides on a whim to rescind his tariffs. These tariffs, they started out as what? As 20%, and then they went to 54% a couple weeks later, and then a couple days ago they went to 104%. I wake up this morning, they're no longer at 125%, which is what they were yesterday, and now they're at 145%. This is madness. This is no way to run a country. This is Donald Trump deliberately trying to destroy our economy. It's more obvious to me. I'm just a lonely toy store owner, and that seems like the only takeaway that there is from this. That's exactly what he's doing. And I don't know how to survive this. I don't know how to order toys for Christmas. I don't know if toys I order now, when they ship, what they're going to cost. How do we plan for that? You know, and it's impossible to plan for, I'll tell you. Like I said, I've gone through a lot of different situations with the store, a lot of craziness. This is the first time it's been done on purpose by someone who's not looking out for the best interests of our country. And that makes a huge amount of difference. Because even in COVID, we knew that there were lots of people trying to get us through this and look out for our best interests. Donald Trump, he's looking out for his own interests. And who knows what those are. Stories are already saying maybe there's just insider trading happening as a result of these tariff announcements on and off. And I wouldn't doubt it. But we're the victims of that. I want to be clear that this doesn't just affect toys. This affects virtually every consumer product that you use in your daily life. The end result is going to be inflation and recession. And those two things together are deadly for small businesses. Those are really hard to survive. I don't know why we forgot about the lessons of the 1930s, but we're going right back into them again. I had a terrible conversation yesterday. We have a supplier, Two Brothers Bows. They make toy bows and arrows that we sell in our store. We've been selling them for 9 years. They're closing up shop. And the thing is, they are made in America. They've always been made in America. That's part of what they wanted to do. And I said, well, what about these tariffs? Isn't that going to be a huge boon to your business? And she said, you know what? It doesn't matter. I still can't afford to make these. And if tariffs drive all my customers out of business, all the toy stores that I deal with across the country, then I have no business. And that's what every single small business in America is looking at right now. Rising costs, inflation, shrinking customer base, and toys that should cost $10 selling for $25. This needs to stop. We need to come to our senses. And what I would do standing here right now is call on our 4 Republican legislators that the state has elected to the federal government and Congress. I would call on them to start impeachment proceedings right now. That's how I feel about this. Tom Emmer and his colleagues, Michelle Fischbach and the others, they're the only ones who can stop this. And they need to step up and save this for the citizens of Minnesota and this whole country. Thank you.
My name is Mike Howard, and I'm the state representative for Richfield and Minneapolis. And first, I want to thank Dan, and I want to thank all of our workers that are here, Jake, and speaking on behalf of folks that are being impacted by what's going on in this country. Prices are going up. Life is getting harder for Minnesotans and small businesses solely because of the decisions of Donald Trump and the AWOL Republican politicians who are complicit in these attacks on workers and families. Specifically, the Trump tariffs are really an act of sabotage on Minnesota's economy and on the bottom line for Minnesotans and small businesses. And in a moment like this, it's vital that at every level of government, folks in power use every bit of it to make the lives of Minnesotans better. And that's what the balance of the bills we're here to discuss attempt to do. To use every bit of our power at the state level to put more power in the hands of Minnesotans and our small businesses. Because right now, Trump is trying to take that power away. Our farmers are getting hit hard. Homes are about to get even more expensive. There's huge risk for further job losses in manufacturing and just about every sector. The price of everything is going up, and the retirement savings of our seniors are going down. The billionaires and the ultra-wealthy, they can weather these storms. In fact, plenty of them probably got a little bit or a lot bit more rich yesterday. But regular Minnesotans just want this roller coaster of chaos to stop. The bill that I'm introducing would marshal all the forces of state government to study and form an action plan to defend Minnesota workers from the harm of these Trump tariffs. We would engage and partner with workers and leaders in all sectors to form a plan to mitigate harm and proactively push back where we can. It represents just one piece of this larger fight that we all need to be in lockstep with Minnesota workers and families to fight back against a federal government that is hostile to regular Minnesotans. One last thing, and Dan mentioned a little bit of this. It's important to note that right now, here in Minnesota, we have the power to stop the Trump tariffs. If every member of our congressional delegation, Democrats or Republicans, were to stand with Minnesotans and vote to end the tariffs, they would end today. And if every Democrat and Republican in the state legislature supported the bills we're talking about, workers would have more power and peace of mind. But it requires Republicans to take their heads out of the sand or Donald Trump's rear end to make it happen. And if they were listening to the people of Minnesota, it wouldn't be that hard of a sell. And with that, we'd open it up for questions.
Would federal employees who take that deferred resignation UI extension bill, under current statute, would they not be eligible for unemployment benefits? Is that how the language is worded?
Yeah, that's what we're kind of looking into is
Resignation, not a quit.
exactly. But the argument is that they've been coerced, right? So they get this email in their inbox unbeknownst to them saying, hey, fork in the road, you can either quit or face the consequences. Well, what's the consequence? So they're going to take the money and run, right? But unfortunately, that's impacting their livelihoods. I mean, I have folks who have worked in the government for 10 years, 15 years, still have 15, 20 years ahead of them, and they're being asked to resign early. Not only that, but they, a lot of them in rural communities where there's not a lot of other jobs. They've got the education, the experience necessary to get these critical federal jobs, and now they're out on the street, and we don't know if they're going to stay in our communities. So the idea is trying to get them sort of this relief and looking at the federal laws that exist now and how we might be able to help at the state level.
Would that require a new appropriation, or is the existing UI trust fund strong enough to, okay, so there's that. But some of these other programs cost money, and you guys are working under tight budgetary restrictions right now. So how do you do this?
So the UI provisions, as you said, would come out of the UI trust fund. There's both a federal UI system and a state UI system, and these would come out of the state UI trust fund. As we heard, this is not that many workers, but it is 10% of our workforce, and so it will have a huge impact. Probably something we've been talking to Deed that the trust fund can weather. I think more generally, one, this is what's happening in budget negotiations, and what DFLers has said is we actually need a budget that shields and protects people. And in this case, I mean, this has only been 80 days, right? And some of this stuff has just happened. The tariff stuff has just been happening sort of the up and down in the last couple of weeks. And so our job is to say we need a budget for the next 2 years that reflects what is going to happen in the next 2 years, not what we thought was going to be in December, because the world has changed so much. And I think that some of these conversations are part of that conversation now. I think after we come back from break and we, in the House, we have all been pre-conferencing our bills, but when the budget bills go to conference, there's a whole conversation that'll be happening between the House and the Senate about how we get to a budget that reflects our values and that protects those workers. And I think whether it's a study or whether it's bonuses, what we're talking about is priorities for Minnesotans.
Quick follow-up there, because you talked about how there's the state UI trust, and if you're a federal worker, there's federal unemployment. Is that to say that, I mean, you're saying that Deed says that you can, the trust can withstand absorbing these folks into the state UI trust, but is that to say that they wouldn't have, if, let's take out the resignation part of this and let's get cute with the words about it. If they were fired from their federal job, they would normally be under the federal pot of money. So is that to say that you're absorbing more people than the amount of employers that are paying into that state trust right now? So you are gonna have more workers getting the benefits than the employers paying into the trust. Long way of saying that.
So, yes, I think if what you're saying is there is a federal UI, and if for folks who get terminated, they should, unless, I mean, we have not seen the Trump-Musk administration honor many contracts or many promises, but the way the law is supposed to work is if you are laid off, you have access to that. We are going to ensure that people who were coerced in a historical way, have access to UI, whether Minnesotans have to pay for it or whether the federal government honors their contract. I am interested in whether there's a legal strategy to go try to recoup some of that money from the federal government, and I think I will not speak for the Attorney General, but I think that they would probably be interested in ensuring that we are protecting the interest and ensuring that the federal government upholds their end of the bargain to these workers.
But if that can't happen, does the state have is the fund ready to absorb the people that is obviously more than they would otherwise be included? They wouldn't be included in this fund.
The short answer is yes. The amount of workers we're talking about, right? And I also just want to note, sort of, this is the wonky, someone who's working on UI for a long time. UI is a partial wage replacement, and right now under Minnesota law, for the small number of the fork in the road, but the broader benefits extension, what we're talking about is the broader benefits extension, people who have 26 weeks of benefits, partial wage replacement. Most of those folks who can find a job will. UI is not, it's half of your salary and you don't get benefits, and what it gives is people a lifeline to be able to go to that next job, to go to that next thing. But for these folks, they haven't been planning for it because they have had a job with the federal government, often serving decades. They might not even have an updated resume. And so what we're doing is providing that extension. I think that you can't assume, that everybody's going to take it, because if people can get another job, they will. And frankly, that's the experience we've seen in other times where we've had more folks on the UI Trust Fund than we've expected.
Separate from the bills that you're talking about here, I know a number of you are working on revenue-raising proposals that could mitigate some of the changes from federal cuts. I wonder if you can speak to whether your Republican colleagues have seemed to come around at all to the notion of raising revenue given what's going on in Congress, or how you make that case to them that that can help.
I'm one of the co-authors. I think, well, there's several bills moving, but the Protect Medicaid, Not Millionaires Act is one that was heard in the House Taxes Committee. We haven't heard much openness from Republicans to consider those proposals. It's a lot of the flat, no new taxes rhetoric, although I'd mention a lot of those folks have been pretty quiet over the last week when we've seen the Trump tariff, which is essentially a tax on Minnesotans, absolutely decimate Minnesotans. So we continue to push Republicans to get real and actually have a plan to address what's coming, but we continue to see Republican legislators sticking their head in the sand, wanting to sort of explain away what's happening with the federal government, as it's not our business to be addressing this. But listen to Minnesotans. I mean, there were twice as many people here on the St. Paul Capitol lawn than there were at the Minnesota Twins home opener. People are fired up all over the state, and so I think if Republicans want to continue to put their head in the sand, they're going to do that at their own peril.
Going back to the UI bill, I think somebody mentioned an amendment, but would you consider putting a timeline in there for how long the benefits would be?
So there already is. So the fork in the road, and I will not, I'm sort of the resident UI expert. That's why I'm taking these questions. The fork in the road is a very specific population over that month. I think it was January 27th to February something that I don't have the date in my head. The population that we're talking about for the benefits extension is a same period and probably going for the first 100 days. And so it is really what we are trying to do is help absorb some of the shock and the impact of what we are seeing. And I think what none of these workers had been preparing for expected. The idea that 80,000 federal workers from the VA would be laid off is something that I think even in their worst dreams and federal worst dreams, they wouldn't have thought. A third of those who are vets. And so what we're doing is saying we are going to absorb the shock where we can, and we're going to help folks get jobs. It is hard when you are work for the EPA in northern Minnesota. There's not, 25 jobs that are the same as that for foresters or for EPA workers, for epidemiologists. And so what we want to do is create that runway. So there is a very specific timeline that is really meant to absorb the shock of the Trump Musk actions and then help do what we need to do, what our state is meant to do, what the dislocated worker program is meant to do, is protect Minnesota's economy. The last thing I will say, though, is this is related to the tariffs piece, because we can handle, and we are sort of giving workers a lifeline. But if tariffs hurt and make sure that and ruin small businesses who are laying off their workers, or big businesses, or our headquarters economy, our economy won't be able to absorb all those workers. And so the tariff piece is actually incredibly important, because we need to make sure Minnesota's economy is strong so that there are workers and jobs to transition into.
I guess what I'm asking is, thank you for that. I guess what I'm asking is there a timeline for how long, I know that this isn't what this bill does, it just says that they still qualify for unemployment insurance, but is there a timeline for how long that unemployment insurance could go for?
It would follow the same rules as an employment insurance. So you get 26 weeks under Minnesota UI. The benefits extension for federal workers who've been laid off is an additional 13 weeks, but the normal 26 weeks is what's contemplated in the law.
The veteran relocation program, that falls under the economic development target, correct?
In theory, I mean, the money would be appropriated to deed.
I mean, regardless of whether that's economic development or ends up in veterans, I mean, those are all fairly slim targets. How do you fit a $6 million appropriation into what, targets you guys have been given?
Yeah, I think this goes to what Representative Greenman was saying, is the sands are literally shifting beneath us every single day based on what's happening at the federal level. And so budget targets that were agreed to at the end of March, come the end of session in mid-May, things may shift and evolve as we go through conference committees. And perhaps, none of us want to have to be in this situation, but there's the prospect of, potentially having to come back for special sessions in the summer and fall. So whether, this is something that we can squeeze in right now under a particular budget target, if it's something that we need to look at as we're going, having potential special sessions down the road, we're bringing responses to the table to try to respond to the actions that are happening on a daily basis at the federal level.
Shed a little bit more light on the study and why it's necessary. I only ask because, economists say tariffs in this way are not good for the economy. You're hearing from business owners saying it's not good for their bottom line. So what more do you need to study about it?
Good question. I mean, the study isn't so much about good or bad. It's about marshaling the experts, leaders all across the state to come up with an action plan. Really make sure we understand what these impacts are in our agriculture sector, for example. So the study would ask experts in our agriculture community to be in partnership at the state government level to really discuss what's happening on the ground with these shifting sands, so that we can determine what are the tools that the legislature can bring to bear. As Representative Norris mentioned, there's a chance we end up in a special session to deal with the chaos of the Trump administration. Assembling this kind of a study and action plan can help us be better prepared to deploy resources or policy mechanisms to address the real-time, real harms that are coming with these tariffs.
Back to the UI, sorry. I'm seeing that, with that kind of email that a lot of federal workers were getting, they were also being told that their benefits and pay would continue until September. I could be getting some information wrong here, but if that is the case, is this bill just kind of a lack of trust that the federal government would follow through on those pay and benefits, or can we just speak to that?
I think the short answer is yes. And I think that the reason is because we literally, and I think today, we heard more about canceled government contracts that should have gone on for the next year. We are fighting, our Attorney General is fighting in court illegal funding freezes. We're fighting illegal, unconstitutional executive orders. And so right now, our job is to protect Minnesotans with the power we have. if the federal government isn't honoring their commitments to our workers, to our veterans, to folks who get Social Security, we're hearing potentially, and we don't know that they're not sharing anything with us. We hear from our state agencies that they can't get somebody on the phone at the federal level. We heard from our congressional delegation that they're just not getting responses. And so we can just prepare what we can prepare for and try to ensure that the federal government is doing what they, and honoring their commitments, but it is our job to protect Minnesotans and to shield them from what's happening, and that's the purpose of that bill. So the state employees who have been laid off in that period, like the 170 MDH workers, they would also have the opportunity to get the benefits extension. As you mentioned, there's 18,000 federal workers. There's probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands more, not just state workers, but local workers. We're hearing about law enforcement direct funding that law enforcement gets from federal governments. If those contracts don't get honored, if that goes away, there's potentially a much bigger reverberation. I think.
Sense of scope of where that is right now, given the grants that have been canceled?
So, breaking news of yesterday, I think the governor sent out a notice, but the MMB now has a public website of sort of trying to keep track of, and the administration's trying to do what everybody else is trying to do, which is just get information about what's happening. So I would start there. And I think it'll be a great resource to tell the public about too, so that folks can see what's happening. And I think with that, you all might need to go get the press stand up with the leaders. Thank you all.